Okay.
So good evening, everyone. Welcome to another webinar organized by BRAZ-TESOL. Today we have Sergio Pantoja with us talking about exam classes. I'll tell you a little bit about Sergio. I guess you know, but I'll tell you anyway. Sergio Pantoja is a CELTA primary and secondary tutor, Delta Module 1 tutor, and freelance teacher trainer. He has been in the ELT field since 2002. Having worked as an English teacher, tutor, teacher trainer, speaking and writing examiner. He holds, among others, the CPE, a degree in languages, a postgraduate degree in English language teaching and translation, a TESOL certificate from the University of Oregon, USA, and the Delta. His Delta Module 3 specialism focus on language development for teachers. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation, and over to you, Sergio.
Thank you, Veruska. It's my pleasure. Actually, it's the second time, right, that I have been invited to deliver a webinar here on behalf of São Paulo, the BRAZ-TESOL São Paulo Chapter, and I am truly honored to be here tonight. So thank you very much for the invitation. Let me start by sharing my screen with you. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be talking about a topic that's very dear to me, which is exam classes. Just like the first webinar, which was, I think it was back in July, right? I had the opportunity to talk about getting started with exam classes, and today we're going to go a little bit deeper into it. And I'd like to start by posing a question, and feel free to type your answer in the chat box. If you were to complete this sentence, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of teaching exam classes? Feel free to type your answer in the chat box. I'm keeping an eye on your answers. Okay, motivating students, definitely. Huge challenge. Providing students with feedback. Okay, all right, so motivating students and providing them with feedback. Absolutely, I completely agree with that. When I think about exam classes, I tend to focus. I think it boils down to three key factors. The first one of them being the exam, because as we know, different exams require different exam skills and different exam strategies and different exam techniques. So depending on the exam you're going to teach, you're going to help your students develop, again, different exam strategies and techniques. But most importantly, I think that it's crucial that we as teachers be as familiar as possible with the exam that we're about to teach. And from time to time, I get teachers asking me whether they should take the exam before they start teaching it. I think that ideally we should, but if you can't, something you can do is to take as many mock exams as you can, so then you become more acquainted with the exam you're going to teach and everything that it entails. Most importantly is the student, because based on the student's needs, you're going to design a course or a sequence of lessons that are going to help you prepare your student to go from point A to point B. In other words, to help your students prepare for the exam. And it also is going to help you determine the materials you're going to use, the strategies you're going to use to teach the student, and also the time that the student needs to allocate in order to prepare for the exam of their choosing. Which leads us to the last point, which is time. And here I'm talking about time in a broader sense, not just the time that the students have before the day of the exam, but also the time that they're going to have to allocate in order to take lessons and study outside the classroom. So I would say that in a nutshell, these are the three most important factors. So the exam, the student, and the time. When you think about the exam, since I told you that tonight we're going to go a little bit deeper into it than we did the last time. When you think about the exam, there are certain aspects that we need to take into consideration. The first one of them is the level of the exam. And I think it goes without saying that if you're going to teach, let's say that you're going to teach a B2 level exam, let's say the Cambridge B2 first. There are many teachers that start preparing, or they feel like starting teaching students and prepare them for certain levels that they're not familiar with, as crazy as it may sound. So my suggestion is, if you're going to teach your students, if you're going to teach students to prepare for a specific exam, make sure that you have a lot of experience in that particular level. Something that helps a lot is if you start teaching students only after you have gained and you have acquired a lot of experience in a particular level. I always tell, or I always recommend that before you start teaching a particular exam, you ask yourself the following question: do I know what that level entails? Because if you don't feel very confident, so maybe you should make sure to, first you should make sure that you become familiar with the level, and only then do you start teaching or preparing students for that exam. The second point we need to consider is the length of the exam, because preparing students for let's say a 2-hour exam is completely different from preparing students for a 4-hour exam. You're going to be using different strategies, different techniques, also helping students deal with time management in different ways. So this is something that we should definitely consider, how long the exam takes. The third point is about the skills that are tested. Most of proficiency exams tend to test the same skills. And what I mean by that is listening, speaking, writing, and reading. But something that's important to consider here is that even though there's some overlapping in terms of skills, they may test different sub-skills. And this is something extremely important for us as exam teachers to know. Because if we think about reading skills, it's kind of an umbrella term when it comes to a skill, because under reading skills, we can have a lot of different sub-skills that can be tested. And then it's up to us to become acquainted with these different sub-skills to help our students prepare for the exam, for their exam, as effectively as possible. Speaking of which, in my previous webinar for the São Paulo BRAZ-TESOL chapter, I talked about how we can identify the different sub-skills that are tested in different exams. So just to recap, but of course that if you want to find out more, you can watch that webinar. You can go to the website. Cambridge, for instance, provides detailed information as to the different sub-skills that are tested with regards to reading, listening, speaking, and writing. So it can help us better prepare our students by focusing on the different sub-skills. Number 4, it's the tasks. So we have different tasks, and I would say that most important than the tasks themselves is to understand, and again, we go back to the topic of sub-skills and skills, right? There are many exams that are going to ask students to complete multiple choice tests, but not all multiple choices are the same. Even though the task itself is the same, they can use multiple choice to test a myriad of sub-skills. So I think it's important to help students become familiar with the tasks, but once again, with the sub-skills that each task tests. Finally, we have assessment criteria. And we know that if we compare, for instance, the TOEFL exam, the IELTS exam, and the Cambridge exams, they have lots of things in common. Sometimes they label things differently, but they are pretty much referring to the same thing. So one exam may refer to discourse management or interactive communication, whereas another student may refer to the same thing using a different terminology. But what I think it's important is, as teachers, as exam teachers, to fully understand the descriptors. Let me give you an example that I believe exemplifies it really well. When you look at the Cambridge descriptors, they often refer to, in the writing part of the exam, they refer to the use of simple sentences and complex sentences. And sometimes I ask teachers what their understanding is of complex sentences, and they tend to associate the idea of complex sentences with things like inversions and cleft sentences. But not only that, it's complex. They refer to complex sentences in the sentences of sentences that consist more than one independent clause. And maybe it's not that clear just by reading the descriptor. So we need to go further in order to make sure that we clearly understand which assessment criterion refers to. Then most importantly, the student. And I really like what the book, this was taken from the book, How to Teach for Exams. The authors, they talk about three very important points we should consider when it comes to students that are preparing for proficiency exams. The first one of them is the importance of listening to our students' concerns and anxieties. I think it's important to remember that it's not just about teaching the students prepare for the exam as if they were machines that are just providing them with information and practice. As we're human beings and our students are human beings, we need to consider their fears, their insecurities, and how to help them tackle those so that they can be really prepared on the day of the exam. So it's not just about, what I'm trying to say here is that it's not just about language, it's not just about exam strategies and techniques, but it goes beyond that. And I think we should be aware of this, of how important these aspects are. The second one is about feedback, as you have mentioned here in the chat, as one of the most difficult challenges, right, to give students feedback when preparing for exams. But I think that our feedback should be as honest and as direct as possible, because in doing so, we're helping students to understand where they are and what they need to do in order to achieve the level that they need, again, in order to take the exam. Think about it for a second, how difficult it can be if you don't give students honest and direct feedback to tell them when the exam is nearing that they shouldn't take the exam because they're not ready yet. But if you keep track of, my suggestion is, if you keep track of their progress throughout the exam preparation, so if you need to tell them that they should postpone, they shouldn't take the exam and wait a little longer and prepare a little more, it's much easier because they have been informed of their progress throughout the course. But I think that things can become really complicated if they are oblivious to it and we just tell them when the exam is approaching. Finally, and interestingly, this point was also mentioned here in the chat, the importance of motivating students and foster autonomous learning. Because it's quite obvious that there's only so much that exam classes can do, right? Or there's only so much that students can learn during their exam classes. So it's paramount that students understand that they're going to have to study outside the classroom. But sometimes there are students that they don't study because they're lazy. Of course, it happens. But I believe that as teachers, we should help students understand and share with them strategies as to how they can continue studying and improving outside the classroom so that they know exactly what to do. Because again, most of students who prepare for exams for a number of reasons can't have more than, let's say, 2 classes a week or 3 classes a week. So on average, they're going to end up having like 2 classes a week, which means that they're going to have to study more outside the classroom. So it's our job to show them how they can continue improving and learning outside the classroom. Which reminds me of a question that I have received recently from a teacher a very interesting question actually. She described to me a situation that was a bit awkward. She told me that she was teaching a private student that was preparing for the D2 first exam. And she had the student do some exam tasks during the lesson. And then one of the things the student pointed out was the fact that what he was doing in the classroom could be done as homework. So her question was, when it comes to exam tasks, should students do them during their lessons or as homework? I think that the question should consider here is, when we have students do exam tasks during their lessons, what is the purpose of that? Are we having them do the tasks so we can teach them something, which leads us to the point of teaching versus testing? Or are we simply giving them tasks for the sake and getting them to practice for the sake of practice? Because in my opinion, what happens is, if we keep giving students tasks during the lesson and they feel that they're just they're doing tasks, and then we tell them what the correct answer is, but they don't get anything out of it. So chances are that they're not going to see any purpose in taking exam tasks during their lessons. So they're going to feel like doing that as homework. But if they feel that, and that's my 2 cents here, if they feel that we're having them do exercise and tasks during their lessons, but there is a teaching purpose behind it, I don't think that they're going to complain at all. Let me give you 3 examples of some of the strategies and some of the ways that I have students do tasks in the lesson, but with a very clear purpose in mind. If you have already taught IELTS lessons, you certainly know how difficult this task is. This is part of the reading task. So students have to read the text, and then there are not only 2 options, but 3, and one of them is the not given one. And this is the kind of task that drives students crazy, because they have to decide whether the statement is in the text, not in the text, if it's not said, or if it's yes, if it's no, or if it's not given. So there are 3 options that students need to choose from. And here's the thing, let's say that we give students this task, we have them doing during their lessons, but then we don't tell them anything about exam techniques or exam strategies or time management. If we don't do that, I mean, most certainly they will feel that they're just doing it for the sake of doing it. So how can we help? I think that basically there are 3 things we can do. Not just concerning this task, but any other task for that matter. The first one of them is guidance. So if students feel that we're having them do a task and provide them guidance, and what do I mean by guidance? How they can approach the task as effectively as possible, I don't think that they're going to complain, because they see that we're trying to help them tackle the exam task. Another thing we can do during the lessons is to have students experiment with different exam strategies and then get them to reflect on the one that was the most effective for them. So they try different exam strategies, and then we get them to think about the one that helped them the most, the one that worked best. And finally, time. At first, most students tend to struggle a lot with time management. So maybe we can give them tips. We can share some tips with them that can help them manage their time and also save time and not spend unnecessary time tackling tasks in a way that's ineffective. Something else that I like to draw students' attention to, it's what we often describe as word spotting. And this is a very common problem, especially at lower levels. So when students don't have much experience with exams, what happens is, this is from a reading task. They look at the question, and when they look at the options, as you can see here, one of the words you have in the options is the word concentrate. There are some very common traps in exams, and one of them is to use the words in the text that also appear in the options. If students don't read the text carefully and really grasp the meaning of the sentence or the paragraph, they may end up choosing an option just because they spot the same word in the text. I mean, that's why this is called word spotting. So it takes, if we don't tell students about that, it might take them a long time until they're able to figure it out for themselves. So here's where the teacher comes in, because we can tell students that what the task is testing, it's not just about matching words, but really reading and understanding it as much as they can. So this is something we can do during our lessons. And one more thing, which is a very common problem too, is what we describe as distractors. What do I mean by that? Also, again, this is very common at lower levels, but I would say that this is something that you can find even at more advanced levels, such as the C1 and C2 proficiency exams. So what happens here is you look at the question, and when you look at the options, here we have pictures, but it could also be the stems. When you look at the options, all of them are mentioned in the listening exercise or in a reading task. they have you can find the same problem there. So students are likely to hear all the options, so they need to make sure that they are able to identify the correct one, not just by listening and trying to identify keywords, but focusing on the idea on the whole. So these are a few examples of the things that we can do during the lessons as we have students practice, that they will certainly be really glad to learn. There's a question here: by using these strategies, we promote a sense of purpose in class, right? Absolutely, yes. There is a sense. There's a purpose which is very clear, and I'm sure that students will be able to understand that. I would say that the problem is when students feel that they're just doing task after task, and there isn't a clear purpose. They're just doing tasks for the sake of doing tasks. Another strategy that I like to use with students, especially at the beginning of the course, when they're not familiar with the exam yet, is to start introducing exam conditions little by little. I think it can be rather overwhelming if we have students do some tasks and try to emulate the conditions. I mean, the time and the number of questions they're going to have to face on the day of the exam if they're not used to them yet. So there is a strategy which, once again, they describe in the book Teaching How to Teach for Exams, which is called simplification. What do I mean by simplification? There are different types of things you can do in order to simplify the task at the very beginning. There are three that I like a lot. The first one is to include fewer questions. You're not going to change the questions. You're not going to make the questions easier. What you're going to do is to keep the questions, but instead of giving students all of them at once, and especially when they've just started preparing for the exams, to include fewer questions, so then they can gradually start getting used to it gradually. The second one that I use quite frequently is to provide students with questions that test a particular sub-skill that they are struggling with. So take, for instance, these two questions that were taken from the TOEFL exam. As I mentioned before, here we have the same skill, right? It's reading. But by looking at the questions, you can tell that different reading sub-skills are being tested. For instance, by looking at number 9, you can see that the reading sub-skill that is being tested here is different from the one that question number 12 tests. Question number 9 is about reading and understanding between the lines. So it's what the author implies, whereas question number 12, it's about understanding the meaning of a particular word in the text. Now, here is my question for you, and then you can type your answer in the chat box. Which of these two questions, even though we're talking about the same skill, but again, different sub-skills, which of these two questions do you think students are likely to struggle with the most? Number 9 or number 12? Number 9? Yes, thank you. That's what my experience tells me too. That number 9 is by far more difficult than number 12. Even again, let me stress that both of them are testing reading skills. The difference is the sub-skills that are being tested. So if you feel that your students are struggling with question number 9, something you can do is to provide them with more questions like number 9. And fewer questions is number 12. Because chances are that they're going to need more practice with questions that require a deeper level of understanding of the text. And there's something else you can do in order to simplify, which is to provide, if you feel that students are struggling with the task at first, you can provide students with the answer and have them explain to you the ones that are right and explain to you why the ones that are not correct and why. So you get them to reflect on why the correct answers are correct and why the incorrect ones are incorrect. So they need to think about the answers in light of the options they have. So these are great strategies. They work really well, and they can really help students during this transition from when they first started to until they become more familiar with the exam. When I posted on my Instagram that I was going to talk about exam classes, I asked the people to send me questions, and most of the questions were, it's interesting because most of the questions were related to speaking. So people, teachers asked to share something about teaching speaking in exam classes. So I'm going to try to cover some of the points that I consider more critical, let's say, and I hope you find them helpful. We're going to start by looking at different tasks in speaking exams. So when you look at exams like TOEFL, IELTS, and the Cambridge main suite, you're going to see that most of the tasks that students are going to face in the speaking part of the exam are interviews, presentations, negotiation tasks, and discussion. As teachers, you should try to understand what each of these tasks test. In other words, what their purposes are. So I have a little task here for you. I'm going to give you 4 options and give you a minute for you to match the purpose with the task. So which one do you think is to articulate more complex opinions and beliefs?
Sergio, is it okay for you if you speak?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So interview would be for answering general personal questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what about the presentation task?
To speak at length.
Mm-hmm. The negotiation one?
Wait. Well, to discuss a given situation to reach a decision.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then it's because discussion, and then you don't have to discuss. It's tricky. And then discussion to articulate more complex opinions and beliefs.
Yes, absolutely correct. Thanks, Michele. Yes. So the purpose of an interview is to answer general personal questions. If you consider Cambridge exams, for example, I mean, if you take them for instance, you're going to see that the first part of the B2 first, C1 advanced, and C2 proficiency is to get students to answer general personal questions. Whereas the presentation part of the exam, sometimes called long term, it's to provide students with the opportunity to speak at length. So it's either 1 minute, and then they look at pictures and talk about the pictures, or they are given a card and they have to talk about the card for 2 minutes. And the negotiation tasks, students get together in pairs or in trios, and then they have to discuss a given situation and try to reach a decision. And finally, this is normally the last part of the exam when students are asked what Cambridge and or the TOEFL or the IELTS describe as unfamiliar questions or unfamiliar topics. So students are asked questions about things that they may never, they may not consider, they haven't considered before, and yet they are expected to speculate and hypothesize about those issues. So that's why we have more complex questions being asked in the discussion stage of the speaking exam. Something that I find that can be a little bit difficult for students to grasp is the concept of what the conversation during the exam should look like, or shall I say sound like. And this leads to turn taking, right? Because when people are speaking, they're taking turns. It goes without saying that a good conversation, if you have 2 people, so let's say A says something, then B listens to A and then says something else, and then B says something that adds to what A already said. But sometimes when students are not familiar with this structure, of course they are in real life, but under exam conditions, they may forget that. And then we may need to remember them that what they are expected to do is to take turns. So what I mean is the conversation should look like what I have here on my right, not on what we have here on the left, with someone dominating the conversation. So what I like to do in order to raise awareness to the importance of turn taking is to choose a video. This video comes from the C1 level, C1 advanced exam. So to get students to watch the video, and I ask them some questions. So as they watch the video, they try to keep those questions in mind and answer them. And the purpose of the questions is to raise their awareness. So let me give an example of some of the questions that I often ask to get students to think about turn taking. The first one, for instance, is which speaker asked for their partner's opinion and how did they do it? So to get them to think about the language that they will need in order to ask for opinions, and what it looks like if you don't, right? So then they become more aware that if they don't do this, they're going to be dominating the conversation, and that's not what's expected from them. Another question you can ask is which speaker gave mostly very brief answers, to raise their awareness to the fact that they shouldn't be monosyllabic and they should try to expand their answers as much as possible. Another one we can ask is which speaker disagreed with what their partner said and did they do it politely? Because in my experience, students are, or shall I say, tend to be afraid of disagreeing or interrupting their partner. But if it's necessary, they need to be ready, especially to interrupt their partner. Because otherwise, if they have a partner that's very dominant, their partner may spend most of the time talking, and they're not going to have the chance to say whatever they want to say or to express their opinion. So students must be ready to interrupt, and this should be done politely. Which speaker developed a point their partner made and how did they do it? Some students are not aware of the fact that to make sure that they're going to, let's say, score as many points as they can, their interaction and the conversation should sound as natural as possible. So if one of them says A, another one says B, and then you move on to C, they're not developing the conversation. And it can be a concept a little bit difficult for them to grasp because they understand the importance of taking turns, but not necessarily it translates into developing a conversation. So it's important to get students to understand that they need to listen to their partner and ideally say something that's going to add to what their partner said, to show the speaking examiners that they've been listening to their partners, and now they are going to acknowledge it. And then finally, you can have students tell you which speaker was more successful in their opinion and why. I think it works really well if you ask these questions, or questions like this, because if you get students the assessment criteria, the assessment criteria, in my opinion, is a little bit too technical. So it may not be easy for them to understand, for example, what the concept of discourse management or things like interactive communication. It may be really clear to us, but I think it's more helpful if we provide them with questions that are going to guide them, instead of giving them a lot of a terminology that may not be that useful. In addition to turn-taking strategies, I like to have students develop communication strategies, especially in the lower levels, when students don't know if they are, for some reason, they don't know what to say either because they are searching for ideas or they can't remember a word. What happens is most of the time they freeze because they don't have any strategy, so they don't know what to do. I believe that we should get students or have them practice lots of communication strategies. So if this problem happens during the exam, they will know exactly what to do. So there are 4 communication strategies that I teach a lot. The first one is paraphrasing. So the idea of if students can't remember a specific word, they can explain it using their own words. So it doesn't mean that they're going to have to to go like and start hesitating. So they know exactly what to do if it happens. Another one is approximation, which is very useful because sometimes students are trying to use a word which is very specific. They can't remember it. So again, they could either paraphrase it or they can use a word which is more general. So let's say, for example, that a student's trying to remember the word cottage, and for some reason they don't remember the word cottage, so they can use house, which is going to help them keep talking. I think this is the most important thing. Students shouldn't stop speaking during the exam because they can't remember a word or a specific word, or because they have a lot of ideas. So they need to be aware of those strategies. Also to use fillers, and of course that fillers should be used, let's say, judiciously. It's not something that we should encourage students to overuse. But I think it does help when they need to hesitate for a few seconds. Do things like, well, you see, they can be really helpful. And finally, something that not many students are familiar with is with the use of all-purpose words. So to use words like stuff or thing, once again, if they can't remember a specific one. Let me show you, I'm going to show you a video, I hope it works, of the one and only Barack Obama using one of those communication strategies. I like to use this video because sometimes when we tell students, right, that they can use communication strategies on the day of the exam, especially if they can't remember a word, they can explain it. They don't feel very comfortable at first because their first instinct is to try and use the word that they want. But even Obama himself uses, or in this case, he used one of those communication strategies in the video. So I have a little task for you. As you watch the video, which is really short, try to identify which of these communication strategies he used. Let's get that done right now. Can you hear it? One second, maybe. Okay. What about now?
Let's get that done right now. That means they're going to be, if you got $3,000 a year extra, that helps you pay down your credit cards. That helps you go out and buy some things that your family needs, which is good for business. Maybe somebody will be replacing some thingamajig for their furnace.
Okay. Did you get the communication strategy that he used? All right. So type in the chat box. Did he paraphrase? Did he use approximation, fillers, or use of all-purpose words? That's right. Letter D, use of all-purpose words. And what word did he use? That's right. Yes. It's funny the way people reacted when he used that word. Exactly. The word is thingamajig. That's the word he used, right? Thingamajig. And then I'm not saying that students should start using thingamajig, of course, but this is an example of a all-purpose word that students can use. And there are many of them, like whatnot, stuff, and thing. But I think that most importantly, students should be aware of this strategy. So if they need to use, well, then they can use. And now this is more like a trivia, actually. We have two books here, and both of them are books that are, well, we have one, the modern one, Objective Proficiency, of course. That's the one most people use nowadays to prepare for the C2 Proficiency exam. And here on my left, you have another book, clearly not a modern one. This is from 1986 But it's also a book that people used to use to prepare students for the proficiency exam. So here is my question for you. There's a huge difference in terms of the number of pages if we compare the book on my left, Progress to Proficiency from 1986, and Objective Proficiency from 2013. So type here in the chat box, how many pages do you think Progress to Proficiency has? A 100 pages. Okay, 300. Okay, well, big difference. So let me show you. Objective Proficiency has 177 pages of content. This is the book that, again, most people use. And Progress to Proficiency has 311 pages of content. What does it tell you? The exam is still C2, right? The level of the exam hasn't changed. When we compare these two books, you have twice as many pages. Why do you what happened? Yes, you can type your answer here in the chat box. The old exam was probably longer. Yes, it was longer. Sure. The latest one must be more objective. Oh yes, as the name suggests, right? Objective. Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point. Yes, it's more objective. But there's something else I would add here. If you look at, and I have both books. I try to be a good person, but I have some very weird habits. One of them is to collect old books. So Progress to Proficiency is a book that focuses heavily on content. You have a lot of there's a huge focus on language. But then again, this is a 311-page book, right? I'm not sure if they would be willing to launch a book nowadays which has 311 pages. Not sure if most people would go for it, but it focuses a lot on language. Something that I can tell about Objective Proficiency is that this is something that Luis Otávio Barros often points out, as you have a scope of 177 pages, there's only so much you can do, right? So course book writers have to try and cover pretty much everything from language to exam strategies, and they have a certain number of pages to use. My point here is, even though it was a trivia, my point here is when we are preparing for students for exams, we need to be ready to supplement the course book. I mean, that's inevitable. We can use a course book as a tool, and I myself use course books, but you should always be prepared to supplement, because I don't think that there's a single course book on earth that is enough for you to prepare your students. You're going to have to go beyond the course book, inevitably, unless you want to use old course books that have over 300 pages, and I don't think that's the case, right? All right, so if you want to send me a message so that we can continue this conversation, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to keep talking about exams. Love the topic. This is the book I have mentioned throughout the webinar, How to Teach for Exams, and I think this is a book that is incredibly helpful, regardless of where you are as an exams teacher. If you are a novice exams teacher, or if you're a more experienced one, you can certainly benefit from reading this book. It's filled with tips and good suggestions. All right, thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you again for accepting the invitation one more time for a lovely and insightful session. Personally, I really liked the suggestions you gave of how to handle the speaking videos, the questions you suggested of asking students to focus on the strategies that are used, the skills that the other students taking the test are using. Really, really interesting. I'm sure you have taken notes of Sergio's contact, right? So you can get in touch with him. And I'm sure BRAZ-TESOL is going to invite him for other sessions too, okay? So we can enjoy a little bit more of his presence and his ideas as well, okay?
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you. Just before I say goodbye, let me just share something with you. We are going to have one more session in this round of webinars Beyond Foundations. Our next session is on December the 8th, and Marcela Sintra will be our speaker. So I invite you to come here and join us again for another session. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Sergio, again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks,
See you
bye,
in our
everyone.
next webinar. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you. Thank you, Sergio. Bye-bye.